I want to welcome everyone to our February meeting for the Teton Photography Club. I want to thank Teton County Library for allowing us to use their facility, and we'll be having our meetings here the rest of the year. I want to quickly do a calendar update for the next few months. Again, tonight we're doing Mastering Star Trails with Gabe Bitterman. March, we'll have an Ask the Experts meeting. April will be a post-processing challenge, and in May, we will do a contest. I'll let you look at the rest of the year, and we'll have more data and information on all the other events. I want to give a big thank you to our executive committee. They're the people who arrange all of these things, find the presenters, get our events together. So I also want to introduce our new member, John Hebringer, and then all of our other executive committee members, Sue Laurie, Rachel Dunlop, Karen Schiller, Kathy Aronson, Lauren Nelson, Aaron Linsdow, Randy Isaacson, Michael Cohen, Barney Kazaka, and myself. So big thank you to all the other executive committee members. As I mentioned last month, each month we're going to begin the meeting with a brief discussion of different topics about printing. We're going to be preparing for a photography exhibit here at the library in either August or September. So you'll be able to bring your prints in and show them to the public. We'll be advertising locally, and if you'd like, you can offer them up for sale at this exhibit. If you miss any meetings, we'll be posting them on the club's YouTube channel. So some of the topics we'll talk about in the coming months are calibration, meaning calibration of your monitor, color management, sizing your print or your photography for printing, cropping and ratios. We'll also cover different mediums, paper, canvas, and other types, and things like where to print, whether to do it yourself or send it to a professional. So the number one thing, starting with getting your monitor right, is the manufacturers typically juice up their monitors to make them look spectacular in a showroom. So as paper doesn't actually present exactly as it does on a monitor, the number one thing is your screen is probably too bright, and you can turn it down. But the best way to do it is also then calibrating your monitor, and that can be done with several devices. This next slide will show you which one of them looks like. They're little puck-like devices that plug into a USB port. You then hang them right on top of your screen, and it will go through a process after you start the software to color correct and set the brightness of your monitor. So here's a couple of shots of what it looks like. It'll, flash up green, blue, red. It's a nice light show as it does the calibration process. Here's a couple of URLs. The two main companies that make these tools are Calibrite and Data Color. You can check those out yourself. So if you don't have access to a calibration tool, contact me, and maybe we can see, there's several of us in the club that have them. Maybe we can make one available to you. And also, again, if you want to relook at this presentation, it'll be on our YouTube channel. So one of the questions we have is how often you should calibrate your monitor. I typically don't do it real often, but some of our experts here, Kathy and Barney, think it'll, once a month to maybe every 3 months is, I think 3 months is probably a good compromise, but monitors do change. Also be aware that if you calibrate it with the windows open or closed, you need to do your adjustments to your photography in the same setting. So you don't get a different look because you've changed the ambient light in your room. So tonight, the presentation is Mastering Star Trails from Gabe Bitterman. He's a co-founder of National Parks at Night. I think you'll really enjoy the presentation. So we are going to turn it over to him. Thank you.
Here. All right. So here you can see one of, this is one of my favorite, oh, hold on, though, it says I have, hold on, it's got that pause thing again. We're having a little issue with this earlier. Let's see if this, okay, there we go. Okay. This is what I think when you think of star trails, an image like this, a circumpolar, where we're looking at either the North Star for most of us here in the Northern Hemisphere, or the southern, into the southern polar, magnetic polar area in the Southern Hemisphere. You'll get this sort of circumpolar effect when you create a star trail for longer than 45 minutes and up to as long as it's dark out, 4, 5, 6 hours. The longer you go, the more, the longer those star trails are going to be. And we're going to get right into that. I should also apologies to everyone in the snow. I did literally just get back today from Easter Island, where the temperatures were about 80 to 90 degrees during the day. But I also get to see the southern stars really for the first time. I've kind of been around the equator, but this was a deep dive in. So I'm very, very excited, and I have a surprise and a debut of a brand new image to show you from this at the end. And for those of you, again, co-founder National Parks at Night, a little bit about, you can kind of see all of our social handles. My personal one is Ruinism on Instagram. You can follow us, National Parks at Night. That's either on Facebook or Instagram. And then these are our websites. National Parks at Night is our dedicated night photography education. We have a lot of free videos online, but we also, National Parks at Night, is its core mission is to bring you to our national parks, mainly in the United States. But again, we just came back from Rapa Nui in Easter Island, or Rapa Nui / Easter Island, which we went to many of the national parks there with the Moai. And so we also are very keen on taking you on tours to national parks all over the world. So National Parks at Night is about that education and workshops. A few of you just attended our Night Photo Summit, which is our virtual conference where we get 30 speakers. Our next one is going to be next year, the first weekend in February. And I know Barney and a couple other people are coming to our Nightscaper conference, I believe. And so if you want to actually be with a group of night photographers, there's going to be about 20 of us speakers there, and about 300 attendees, like-minded lovers of the night. And we're in an amazing night skies of Kanab, Utah. It's an amazing, amazing experience. So you can learn more with us, not only online, but also in person. Because when we do it, when we repeat it, that's obviously how we get better. I remember this is an early film shot. This is in the early 2000s. I'd been already doing night photography for 10 years or so. And this is film. And this is what we had to do back in the film days. We went out every full moon. It was a schedule that we'd make, because film wasn't sensitive enough unless you were shooting urban night photography. But if you were getting out to the dark skies, you couldn't record the Milky Way. So we would go out every full moon, work around the full moon, and film also pushed you to star trails. I love star trails because it's something our eyes can't see. So it's something we do our best to figure out. And then we kind of leave that element of surprise out there that still 25 years later gives me, I'm still finding surprises in the night. This is from actually New York, about an hour and a half north of New York City. This is Bannerman Castle. You're not seeing as many stars here because of the light pollution from Newburgh and of various small cities that are kind of eating up the sky here with that. This is also one of my favorite star trails taken in the last year and a half, because this is one of the only star trail shots that I've ever seen that also has auroras in it. Most people, when they go and are photographing the auroras, they're shooting shorter exposures, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds, to capture that aurora before it kind of moves away. But I was setting up, there wasn't a forecast for aurora, so I was setting up this star trail shot, and then boom, it surprised us. I kept it running for a few shots, and again, those pleasant the night continues to surprise us. We have tar trails, star trails, and aurora in this shot, so a nice little holy three there. But again, like I said, the whole beauty and magic of star trails is it's something that cannot be seen with that naked eye. So it's kind of, we're tapping into our imagination and what can we do, and we can create things. The more we know how stars turn and look at which direction you face, the more we can kind of control those elements with it. Now, again, the stars are not the stars are trailing, but they're not moving, right? Remember, it is the Earth's rotation, right, that we are moving. And so thus our film, our cameras are recording the direct light sources of the stars, so making our cameras sensitive enough to see the stars, get into a dark enough location that we can do that. But as the Earth rotates, we are now kind of forever burning those stars onto your sensor, onto your film, and then we can put them together from there. Stars will generally start to trail at 15 seconds. It could come as early as 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds if you're using a telephoto lens, but typically with wider angle lenses and super wide angle lenses, you're safe up to 15 seconds. You can still get star points, but then after 15 seconds, they start to trail. And they don't get really interesting until you get to about 4 minutes or so, because you don't just want oblong little star trails. You want something that's got a little oomph to it. And playing with time, getting a variety of images from a location is just amazing. When I shoot for star trails, I could be also shooting for time lapses. I could be shooting for star trails. I could be shooting for star points. It depends how many setups I have. I do tend to go with 2 tripods, 2 setups, so I can stay really, really productive out in the field. But if you're only going with one and you're going to focus on star trails, your camera could be tied up for a couple hours. This shot out in this is the OVRO satellite array in like Lone Pine, California area. This is 13 8-minute exposures that are stacked to equal a 1 and almost at 1.5 hour star trail shot. This is at aperture 5.6 and an ISO of 100. I'm able to use those lower ISOs and higher shutter speeds because this was a moonlit night. There was it was quite a bit bright out, so I could get to really some optimal exposures. Okay, star trail tips. If you and your eyes can't see the stars, guess what? Neither can your camera. And one of the big culprits for not being able to see the stars, besides urban light pollution, is the moon. When the moon is up, and you're photographing near the moon, as we can see in this image, I don't see any stars, and still we're getting about 30 degrees away from the moon. I love doing that. I'm not saying only go shoot star trails when there's no moon. That's not what I'm saying at all. But focus to the other side of the sky, or be aware. So if there's a composition and the moon is over that composition, you're not going to see a lot of stars. So maybe focus on something else, or know when the moon will be where it will be, if you specifically want to get it at an angle, because moonlight and star trails do go very nicely together. The moonlight will lighten up your foreground nicely, so it won't be silhouetted, bring a lot of rich detail. And a lot of the images you're going to see are going to be star trails of mine under moonlight, but not shooting directly towards the moon.
Hey, Gabe, this is
Yep.
David. We had one question.
Yep.
We wanted to know what your settings were for the Aurora shot you showed earlier.
That one was probably 2 minutes, 5, 6, I believe. But those were probably a stack of like a 2-minute shots. So I don't, when I have the data on there, I have it. If I don't, it's going to be, I can give you a guess. But I think that one was it's somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes, because the Aurora, I think that's 1 or 2 shots of the Aurora blended in together. Okay. Oh, there we go. Hold on. Let me get, go back here. Apertures and ISOs control how bright your stars will appear. Now, this is a key thing, similar to those of you who use flash photography. When the flash is too powerful, when we're using this other light source, right, a direct light source, we can control the power by dialing down the power of the flash, or we can use our apertures and ISOs, and we can go to a smaller aperture, right, and that will cut the power, or we can go to a lower ISO, it'll cut the power down by 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stops, however much you stop it down. Or if you want more of that light to come in, you go up and you open up those apertures, you go to a higher ISO. So obviously we can't control the power of stars, moon, and stuff like that. We can't dial that down, but we can control it with our apertures and ISOs. Okay. For example, this image right here is a single image. It's a 58-minute star trail at f/16 at ISO 200. This is with a Fujifilm camera. This is in Grafton Ghost Town right outside of Zion. And these star trails are very dim. They're very, I can see them, but they're not as vibrant, as bright as they could be. This camera, the only way for me to get to an hour-long exposure, I couldn't do, at the time, it didn't have an intervalometer that fit it, et cetera. So I just went, to get the longest star trail I could. And the only way I could do that was by stopping down to my lowest ISO of 200 and the lowest aperture of f/16. And both of those are making the dimmest stars in the sky even dimmer. So you look close, you can see them, but they're not as bright, right? Where the bright stars are still being recorded. And that's because, again, stopping down the aperture and going to the lower ISO. And we're going to talk more about that later, because there's reasons why you want to do that and why you don't want to do that. The length of your exposure and the direction that you're pointing, north, south, east, west, will determine how long your stars will be. Now, this one is from Joshua Tree. We're pointing due north. As you can see, the little dot, that is Polaris. Polaris just makes a little squiggle. We rotate around that here in the northern hemisphere, so that hardly moves at all. But as we get further to the east and west, you can see the stars for that same amount of time, 2 hours, are getting longer as we move away from the north. Okay, so ding, ding, ding. North is the shortest stars, but we move to the east and west, we'll get longer stars. I used a medium ISO for night photography of 1600, but stopped down my aperture to 5.6. That's giving a little bit more depth in the scene, but that's also making it a little less chaotic. If I had shot this at 2.8, even the dim stars would be very bright and it would take away from the scene. So again, that's kind of, one of the reasons why you might want to choose. You might have the right exposure, but you can say, oh, let me say, how can I make it maybe not too chaotic, take away, or maybe it does need that because there's not a lot going on. Maybe it's very plain foreground and you want to make it all about the circumpolar stars, so then you can make them as bright and vibrant by shooting at 2.8 or a higher ISO. So I'm going to show you the same exposure with the same lens. All the settings are the same, and what stars look like when you point in different directions. So each of these exposures is going to be 15 minutes at ISO 800 at 2.8. This is A moonlit night, you can see a lot of detail on the foreground. This is in Capitol Reef. And this is also shot with a 24-70, or I think it was, whatever, it's a 70mm lens. Okay, and that's also another point, right? The more telephoto of the lens that we use, the more we are magnifying or zooming into how the stars and how they're gonna trail quicker the more we magnify them, right? So stars will take longer to trail when we're shooting with a 24mm lens than they will with a 70mm lens. So here's pointing north. We can see not that long of a star trail, but we look to the south, and those will be the longest. Again, this is Northern Hemisphere speaking. It flips when we go to the Southern Hemisphere. And these are going to be sort of horizontal star trails to the south, or as horizontal as you can almost get, but they'll be kind of very flat. And if you extend this like an hour, it would be almost like a hump. Okay. To the east, we're going to see stars kind of think of it as the closing parentheses, but they will straighten out. And then as you start to head back towards the north or south, they'll start to bend the other way. But you also get a true line, depending upon where you are in the world, pointing anywhere from straight up near the equator or at an angle, the farther north we go. Okay, so you see these are not as long as the south ones, but they're still pretty long. And then to the west, these are, think of them as sort of, I always like to think of them as the beginning parentheses, right? But then we'll also, when we hit right along the celestial equator, they'll be super straight and at an angle up in the New England area. So this is, knowing this and understanding this will help us kind of position the star trails against the subject matter. Because, if you just, obviously, if you're new to this, you're just going to go out there, expose, have fun, and really enjoy the magic of star trails. But the more you do it, the more you understand, to be like, okay, I want my trails really, just like we want our lines and our compositional lines to be in any picture, we want to lead people through the image. Well, yes, guess what? These star trails are lines that we can interplay in creative ways with the rest of our composition. For instance, this is a shot I took in Pittsburgh. This is not a lighthouse. This is a water tower. That's glass top is lit up by the moon. So a lot of moonlight here. But I specifically am pointing south here, and because remember the southern ones are like those kind of most horizontal ones. I wanted the image the star trails to look like beams of light, kind of coming out of this lighthouse. So I wanted them to be, horizontal, flat, bright, and short. And I knew that they would start to curve. They'd start to bend a little bit like a hump, probably after 10 or 15 minutes. So I limited my exposure to 7 minutes, f8. Okay, so some of the dimmer stars you're not seeing that because of that smaller aperture, and that ISO also being 200 we're not seeing the dimmer stars. We're just seeing the brighter ones. And I'm using a semi-telephoto lens, 50mm lens. So that's also amplifying that movement that we're seeing with the stars trailing. So I mentioned the celestial equator and that when we looked at the east and west, but here it is right here. Okay, so when we point due east, if you're lost in the woods, you need to find due east. Take a long star trail shot. But pointing due east, due west along the celestial equator, you'll notice that those stars will start to trail in the straightest possible. They will not bend. They'll continue along, and that can also be really, really creative. And then as you look on either side, they'll start to bend one way and the other as you go from east, to north to south from that direction. So that's really cool. You can see stars going in 3 different paths and be, again, creative with this image, with these kind of images. I got the chance to go to the Galapagos, which rides the equator. And I was like, I gotta see. I mean, supposedly the stars stand up straight, right? And the straightest line as we're going, from along that celestial equator, either to the east or west. There wasn't many dark places in sort of the cities you could stay at in the Galapagos, but I went out to a port and took this shot. This is probably, I think, about a 15 or 30-minute exposure, but this is what the celestial equator, when it's on the equator, looks like. Stars standing up. And that can be kind of cool. If you get a really long exposure, you can have kind of it bending on either side. I've only seen a few of those shots. I think Africa is one of the few places that's dark enough that you can get to, that you can kind of get those shots. But obviously you got to watch out for some of those animals out there. Well, guess what, guys? There's a tool you can use as well to help you kind of pre-visualize how these stars are going to, how they're going to look in the sky, and that's photopills. And
They need to watch.
yeah, and David had mentioned you guys have been really keen on photopills and wanting to learn more. This is easy. I don't use photopills as much for my star trails, except in probably the easiest pill that's there, and that's the Night AR, Night Augmented Reality. And when we do that, when we hold over the Night Augmented Reality, most of us are using that to kind of see where the Milky Way is, the core of the Milky Way, et cetera, et cetera. But you're always seeing these blue lines, right? And those are the lines of what the stars are going to look like. And we can see I'm facing north of this dinosaur. A little on top of him would be the North Star. And then you can see kind of how they're bending and turning. And again, here's another image now facing south. And there in the south, that orange dot, that's the core of the Milky Way. And then again, you're seeing the lines are bending, like I said earlier, it's going to be kind of horizontal, but like a hump over your horizon and in the night sky. So this is a great way for you to, if you got a really interesting composition that you can attack at a couple different angles, open up photopills, look at in the Night Augmented Reality and say, okay, I want to do a star trail here. Which way is those stars and the trails going to interplay best? This is really cool. I like this idea because here the stars are really kind of joining these two dinosaurs together for this image. Let's talk a little bit about gear and what kind of gear you need. Night photography in general, you're going to need some more specific gear, and you're going to be pushing the gear you might have kind of to its limits. More and more camera companies are understanding that people are interested in taking longer exposures, night photography, that kind of stuff. So we are seeing some more features make their way into the camera, which is very, very exciting. I do typically recommend full frame cameras for night photography, just because you're going to get the best dynamic range of and high ISOs. That being said, I think Olympus and Panasonic are doing some amazing creative things with their live bulb, live composite, and they're smaller, the micro four thirds for Olympus, and then in Panasonic, their new full frames are incorporating some of those features as well that make it quite easy to do star trails, light painting, etc. Either way, you should have a mirrorless camera or a DSLR. Really, star trails are not going to be done with your point and shoot camera, not going to be done as much as Apple will tell you with all their marketing with the phones and stuff like that. Not with phones, not with point and shoot cameras, etc. It should be something that is manual controls. I would also be wary of the higher megapixel cameras, something like the Nikon Z7, the Canon EOS 5, the Sony A7R 5.6 cameras. The only reason why I'm going to say watch out for those, they have gotten a lot better with their highest ISOs, but when we are doing time lapses and star trails at night, we're collecting a lot of images, and so if you don't have a computer from the last probably 2 or 3 years, your computer is going to struggle to kind of stack the stars together. So if you have an old computer, don't use a high megapixel camera, because otherwise that high megapixel camera will push you to get a new computer. Unless you want that new computer, that's a good excuse to do it. So just be wary of that, because by stacking star trails, you can be creating very large files that your computer and your hard drives will could struggle with. A good lens is needed for star trails. Obviously, having a lens that can go down to 2.8. I often use a 24-70 2.8 lens. That is the one I lean on the most. That gives you the most variety of things you can do at night. But if you have an f4 lens and you have moonlight, that's you can use that lens as well. So that, but having a good lens, a lens you like, and a lens that gives you the focal lengths you need, which again, if you're going to include more night sky, generally I'm shooting, in the range of between 14 and 35. That's my preferred focal lengths at night. A sturdy tripod is a must. None of these plastic ones, get one that's either aluminum or carbon fiber, and it's sturdy, comes up to your, it comes up to your height and will hold the gear. And then intervalometer is a key thing. And we're going to talk about, go into depth on a few of those things as well. This image from Sloss Furnaces, this is a really cool place in Birmingham, Alabama. This is a 20-minute star trail stack at 2.8 at ISO 200. Or ISO 100, sorry. That is a lot of moonlight there, right? Again, that's why I can get down to that ISO 100 for this image. If you really want to learn more about tripods, I actually really put in a great deal of effort with the rest of National Parks at Night, but really, I'm known as the gear guy. I work at B&H Photo. I started out in the tripod department. I've probably owned about 20 tripods in the last 20 years because I'm always looking for the perfect one. Through all that research, we created this ebook that you could download by going to our website, nationalparksatnight.com/tripod-guide. And that will give you 70 pages of information, everything you want to know about tripods, travel tripods, full-size tripods, tabletop tripods, all the accessories around there, and some really key stories and information about it. The remote release. So this is something that is definitely needed for star trails. Now, whether you use a wired one, which I generally prefer, the one featured here, the Velo Shutter Boss, which also comes in a wireless version, which some people like that. I bring some with as loaners, but wireless ones mean that there's more pieces and more batteries to be concerned of. So that always, bothers me. However, if it's snowing and cold outside, you want to set your camera outside in your backyard and photograph the mountains in your backyard, the trees, whatever, then having a wireless one and controlling it from the comfort of your living room is a really good idea. We are seeing more and more cameras offer internal intervalometers, and they can work a little specifically. So the need for maybe not having one of these is becoming more and more, but you definitely want to learn one. Each one of those internal ones are a little quirky, and there's a learning curve. So I recommend practicing with it indoors first. Make sure with the ones that are wired wireless, get the ones for the right connection. Sony and Canon have 2 different ways to connect it to their different cameras. And this is a way that we can go beyond bulb. Most cameras would go to 30 seconds and then B for bulb. Now we are seeing Fuji, we are seeing, I think Sony has started it, definitely Nikon has started it with some of their new mirrorless models. Now you can have extended shutter speed exposures that go up to 15 minutes, which if I have that, that's pretty much all I need, plus that built-in, the built-in intervalometer in my camera. So I bring one of these as a backup if someone else needs it in the field, but I really don't need to use one anymore. But those are key. This is very key to controlling and creating star trails, as well as time lapses. All right. For instance, this is actually a shot I took in Morocco. So fairly recently. So even the pros still make mistakes. And here I had set up my built-in intervalometer. It must have been lack of sleep or whatever. But here you can see with the intervalometer, whether it's built in or with a shutter boss, it's key that you're taking a series of shots, and the interval, the time between shots, should be no more really than 1 second. If you go longer than 1 second, and you'll get what we call star braille, not star trail, and your stars will be broken and it'll be impossible to connect. And for this image, I think the stars, the break in between, I somehow set up with like a 20-second break or something like that in between shots. So we see it was exposing, then off, and the Earth moved. You know, even in 20 seconds, the Earth continues to move, right? So we're seeing that kind of breaking up of the stars. And that, you know, like I said, usually not a fun thing. Another consideration when talking about gear that's, again, pushing our cameras to the limits, and this is especially for mirrorless, but if you have older cameras with older batteries, power. Because star trails demand power. Oftentimes, again, especially if you want those circumpolar long shots, we're talking about an hour, at least 3 or 4 hours. Now, even the biggest battery out there, a single battery, probably only lasts 2 hours for continual shooting for that. So one option to get more power, obviously put a battery grip on if you have, and you can add a second battery. So that'll get you at least 4 to 5 hours of shooting. I like these this Tether Tools on-site case relay, which you kind of see attached to my my Z6 right there. It's attached to the tripod, and then it's got a it goes basically into a 80,000 milliamp USB battery pack, which I'm usually, you know, carrying if I'm out in the woods. I want to have a way to charge up my phone and other things. And a lot of us have these, so you can now plug, and especially true for mirrorless cameras, you can plug directly into it USB-C and keep it powered with one of these things, and that'll power you 6, 8, 10 hours, depends how powerful that power bank is. So that's sort of the ultimate in power if you're really going to pursue that. And then another thing that might happen, especially in the summer and spring and fall, is dew might happen. And actually this happened in November in Birmingham, Alabama. You know, whenever you reach the dew point, your lenses, as you probably have experienced before, can get condensation and dew on them. And if you set up a shot and you don't want to let it go for an hour or two, and within 20, 30 minutes you get dew on it, it's ruined. You know, you can't cut through. No amount of dehaze is going to cut through that dew. So I now always carry a dew heater with me. It's so easy and lightweight to carry with. I always have my portable battery pack as well. It just plugs in. You want to keep the lens above the dew point. So it's basically a dew heater. It's going to heat up your lens. You want to put it on at the beginning. So if you think there's going to be some dew, you're noticing you're walking through the grass is, you know, a little wet already, especially if you're shooting low to the ground. The first line of defense, get higher off the ground. Second line of defense, use a lens shade. Those two things will save you 20 minutes. But if you don't want any dew and avoid all moisture on your lens, get a dew heater. This is what it looks like. It'll wrap around. You want to have it wrap around, hopefully the front of the lens. Hopefully that's not the focus. It's more the zoom area. If it is the focus, make sure you get your focus first and then wrap it around, or put it as close to maybe the lens hood as you can there. And then that can also be plugged into that same case relay that I was talking about with Tether Tools. So I'm powering two things, the camera and the dew heater at once. And now I am locked, loaded, and nothing's going to stop me. At least dew or lack of power are not going to stop me from creating those long exposures. Here's a close-up of what it looks like. And they usually go $15, $20. So an easy investment to, again, always put in your bag. Have it there. All right, so figuring out your exposure. This is the the big thing is, okay, Gabe, you're talking about star trails, all this stuff. How do we figure out this? And this is how we figure out any base night exposure is I try to be productive. I try to create short, quick test shots so that I can get to shooting the real shots as quickly as possible. And so we created a long time ago, in the digital age, what we call the high ISO test shot. And this will help us often see, because oftentimes our cameras, it's hard for us to see, especially if we're in a dark area. We can't, a few cameras will gain up their LCD. We're seeing that improvement happen now in some of the cameras, but all DSLRs are pretty dim to look through, and still probably half to 3/4 of the mirrorless cameras are it's pretty difficult to see through and compose. So we'll take a few shots. I'll go all the way up to 6400 ISO. I'll go to 2.8, and I'll go to probably, again, I'll look actually at your meter. When you raise up your ISO, your sensor is incredibly sensitive to light. So even when there's minimal light here, we can actually gauge and get a good base understanding. So I'm going to gain up the ISO to 6400, open up my lens to 2.8, and then use the meter to see, okay, I need 4 seconds, 8 seconds. It's usually somewhere in that range, unless it's really dark. Maybe I need 15 seconds. But then I can do these shorter exposures to help me compose, help me focus, and then help me, get to the proper exposure. So we're going to talk about this. But first, so here's the end result of the image. But this was the first shot I took. Okay, so here I am, 6400. It's quite bright out. We see the moonlight. So instead of being 2.8, I was like at 5.6, because I knew there was enough light that I could do that. And it was also 15 seconds. I'm a little overexposed here, and I have got kind of too much of that foreground in there. I want to get closer. I want to get closer to the road. That one, I'm too close to the road, right? It's like, oh, all right. So let me get another ISO test shot. That one is just right. And you can see I took down one stop of light. I went to F8. Okay, so now I've got the proper exposure. Okay, but now what do I want to do with it? There's certain things we would do for star points, Milky Way, but for star trails, we can play. Here's the bottom line, folks. We should play, especially when there's moonlight, is play to optimal image quality. And generally speaking, the first thing we want to lessen is our ISOs. If we're taking high ISO test shots at 6400, might look okay, and a lot of cameras can handle it, but generally speaking, the first thing we want to do is, if we can, let's get to a lower ISO. Okay? I've talked about the apertures and why those apertures are important. And then the shutter speeds, typically speaking, shutter speeds we can push, because we're looking for those longer exposures. So I can kind of play to an optimal aperture and ISO, and then extend those shutter speeds to where we'll talk about in a few minutes about long exposure noise reduction. That would be the sort of the place where we have to be concerned with shutter speeds. So here we go. Was my test shot at 6400, F8, 15 seconds. And this shot, I needed to have 2 to 4 minutes for the car to drive through. So I dropped it down. So it's, I went to 3200, 1600, 800, 400. So I dropped it down 4 stops. And then I added those 4 stops to the 15 seconds. So it was 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes. And I came up with that shot. So I took away 4 stops of light to the ISOs, and I added 4 stops to the shutter speed. I kept my aperture the same. I juggle, and I can tell you, as a juggler, it's easier to juggle 2 balls than 3, right? So it's easier, zone in on one element, and then you can always just juggle the 2. But again, be flexible, understand what these things do. And then I could have also gone down to 5.6, and been at ISO 800, or 5.6 and ISO 200, right? So, because I'd be opening up the aperture but then lessening the ISO. But once we get our that kind of base exposure, and when I'm looking at this, I'm also looking at my histogram, right? How do I know this is the right exposure? I'm looking at that histogram and I'm making sure that things are not crushed all the way on that left-hand side, and things are not also spiking out with any highlights. And I had to be aware of that right-hand side. The moon was out of picture, but still the sky area was getting brighter there. So let's, so here we go. Here's sort of a breakdown. And I was talking full stops because that's sort of the easiest math. We're either halving or doubling, right? So here I was at 6400 F8, 15 seconds. And then I just moved, again, 4 stops, added time. And then by adding 4 stops, I then went lower to 4 stops to ISO 400. Okay. Now there is something that works out well, because you're like, Gabe, I'm a photographer. I don't like math. Even though there's a lot of math involved, we just don't like to deal with it. But there is something called the 6-stop rule, which will work very well when there is at least half a moon to a full moon out there. So you need a lot of light for this rule to work. But this one is the easiest math out there, because this one, when we can operate 6 stops and we're at ISO 6400, we can go from 6400 to 100. And that's 6 stops. And then the seconds, 6 stops on the seconds would equate to the same number in minutes. Okay, so here we go. Let's look at the math here. If we have 6400, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if we go to 100 ISO here, then we double over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4 seconds would equal 4 minutes. 8 seconds would equal 8 minutes. 1 second would equal 1 minute. So that's the best math out there. It doesn't work well with fractions. So if your exposure at 6400 is a fraction of a second, then you're not going to have to count down the 6 stops. But if you're in the seconds, they will equate to the same number in minutes. And that's pretty fun. That's good. That's good, easy math. That's kind of math we all like. The color of stars. So in a lot of these stars, I hate to tell you, a lot of these stars that I'm going to talk about here in the Southern Hemisphere, because the stars are just so much more vibrant down there, especially if you can get to a darker location. But there is a certain quality or a color to stars depending upon how old those stars are. I mean, think about our gas stoves, right? And the bluer ones is the hotter heat, and the blue ones is the higher heat, and the yellow is the less hot. And same thing here with these stars. The bluer stars are going to be the older stars that are burning brighter, and the yellow ones are the younger stars. So we have the colors in between that as well. But here's sort of a selection of some of the stars and the colors that they might be, or they would be under the true interpretation, as true as we can get. You know, the thing with obviously with anything recorded digitally is we can interpret it, change our white balance, and obviously change what colors the stars are. This is from Big Bend National Park. This is a 2-hour star trail stack at F4 at ISO 1600. And for this one, I'm finding the balance between the colors, the little bit of light pollution there that we can see. Here's if I were to cool down the white balance to 3200 Kelvin, then I'm making the sky more blue, right? So we're making this sort of a blue dominant. We're not really seeing those older stars prevalent as much, because everything's so much of the sky is turning blue, but we are seeing the more yellow orange stars in this image. And we're also seeing white stars are the ones that are overexposed there. And this is too warm. This is probably at a white balance of 4800. If I were to, at the truest white balance that I would say, if you want to really play to the colors of the stars, is going to be somewhere between 3800 and 4400. But it also, folks, is really cooked to taste. I don't want to, I've looked at the science of how to properly expose stuff. to be true to the night skies. But those images are just often lack punch and are often very yellow and very brown. And for me, I don't find that appealing. So there's always creative interpretation. We were talking at Night Photo Summit. We had Joe DePasquale, who basically is getting the web satellite and putting the colors together, because that's all shot, infrared, and then they're assigning the colors. And there is some math to it, but there is also open for interpretation for those colors as well. So that, again, this is sort of finding that balance that you find appealing. And if you want to play to the science of it, you can do that as well. Now, there's two ways. I've talked a lot about stacking stars, but there's really two ways to create star trails. The most common way and the most productive way is by stacking stars. And that is by taking consecutive, shorter exposures that are playing to a more optimal exposure, aperture, all the elements involved. So stacking stars helps you stay more productive, consecutive images versus a single shot, which is going to be one long single exposure that you need to kind of have the right lighting to balance the optimal elements for the scene. Now, I mentioned apertures and ISOs. Those are going to control how bright and the color of the stars. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, the color of the stars. But shutter speeds, I said, really, so far you can push those shutter speeds long. It's not as big of a concern. And what I'll tell you, in the Tetons this winter, yes, you can. If the temperature is not getting above 40 degrees, you can often take a single 1 hour exposure without getting what we call long exposure noise. There's two types of noise that we encounter in digital photography. We're probably all very familiar with high ISO noise, and that's the granular quality that, if you remembered and shot film, you know that, hey, anything usually above 1600, ISO is going to have the granular quality is going to get big and could get in the way. And now we're talking about shooting 6400 ISO, right? There's going to be a granular quality. Now, it's a little bit more forgiving, I think, with night photography and digital, just because there's a lot of gas, dust, grain. There's a granular quality to the night sky. So I think it's not like we're shooting someone's portrait at 6400 ISO and we have to be very sensitive to any granular quality on their face. But the night sky, especially rocks, we're out in a national park, there's a granular quality to that. So we can be a little bit more forgiving with that. And that's why I'll often shoot at higher ISOs. But if we look at this image, this is from Natural Bridges. Underneath that arch, I see a couple red flecks. It's like it's a flecks or like confetti, colorful noise. That is from that's from long exposure noise. Okay, and this is going to happen. Depends on your camera model. It's your processor. And think about this. Our cameras are computers, right? When we're tapping away on our laptop and it's on our lap and we're processing maybe a big star trail image, our computer heats up and our lap gets hot, right? And, that emits heat. And with that heat comes this in the digital innards with the circuitry, and then onto the sensor, we're getting these bigger specks of noise, colorful noise. That's a pain in the tuchus to remove, right? So, and it kind of depends on how hard your camera's working, which it generally is working hard at night, and then how hot and how dry it is. Humidity helps, actually. This is one of the few things where humidity helps, but generally speaking, before we were going out into deserts so much, we're more in the New England area, and I could usually get star trails without noise reduction. Even in the summer when it was 80 degrees, I might be able to get a 4-minute, 6-minute, maybe even an 8-minute exposure before I'd see this noise. You go into the desert and it's really dry and it's still that same temperature, 80 degrees or higher, you're getting it after 15, 20 seconds. Okay. And the only way really to remove it, because you don't want to remove it in post, it's very, very, it's like removing dust off of your negatives when you've got 50 particles of dust, right? So this is a 45-second shot, 6400 ISO with no noise reduction. Every camera has a function called long exposure noise reduction. Sometimes they abbreviate it LENR. And when you turn that on, look at that. It doesn't remove the high ISO noise, but it does remove the specks of noise as we go back and forth. It doesn't remove airplanes either, but it removes those specks under the arch. Now you can say, Gabe, why when I always have long exposure noise reduction on? And I'll tell you, unfortunately, what this is doing is it's doing in-camera Photoshop. And it's basically, it takes a picture, and then it is taking a dark frame image and sandwiching it over the image, and then looking for any similar speckled noise in the scene and basically removing it. And if you are anyone besides Canon, then if it's a 30-second exposure, it's going to take the same amount of time to do this long exposure noise reduction. And remember how I said you can't have really more than a second break in between doing star trail shots, right? So if I'm doing 30 seconds, then I'm doing 30 seconds and that's it. I'm only doing the long exposure noise reduction. So there's now a break in between images. Canon, a lot of the Canon cameras, even the DSLRs it started with, but it's also held through with the mirrorless cameras, have auto noise reduction, and they have, which is a good feature, and they're built in more for video purposes. They have a better buffer that can often do this in the background. Now the buffer could get filled up if you're doing a 4-hour thing. It might get filled up, and then you might have a break of it. But Canon generally is the best to have turn on that auto long exposure noise reduction, and it can keep buffering, keep filling that in while and not create a break in between images. But everyone else, we have to not use long exposure noise reduction and either take a dark frame subtraction and do it ourselves, or if you don't like doing more post in the field, is find the sweet spot and take a few test shots out in the field, look to the shadows. So that was 45 seconds, right? And now here's 90 seconds without noise reduction on, and you can see it's even more prevalent. So oftentimes before I get started, once I figure out my base exposure, and I'm like, okay, well, I'd like to be at this ISO, I'd like to be at this aperture, okay, the temperature, and what I'll tell you is really that noise starts to kick in 68 degrees and higher, and then depending on how dry it is, humid, so usually 68 degrees and higher can get away with 1 or 2 minutes, 68 degrees. So I would say from 70 degrees to 67 degrees, I can get away with like about 1 to 4 minutes. Higher than that's going to be less. It's going to be less than that. It's going to be 1 minute or less, 30 seconds less. And then the colder we get, the longer we can go. And when I've gone up to visit my family in New Hampshire, and it's been 32 degrees out, I've tested every camera on the market for an hour, and no noise reduction is needed because the outdoor temperature is keeping that processor from heating up and thus creating that long exposure noise. So in summary, turn long exposure noise reduction off, or if you're a Canon user, turn it to auto. I generally prefer, it's safe to say that 30 seconds to 2-minute shutter speeds are safe unless you are getting above 68 degrees. And an intervalometer needs to be set for 1 second. This is about an hour-and-a-half star stack from Zion National Park on a moon on a moon rising night. Now, if you do take a single long shot, the beauty of that, a single long shot, is that you can turn long exposure noise on. So say I want to do a 15-minute star trail shot, I can just say, hey, I just want to do one single 15-minute shot. I'll turn on my noise reduction. It'll be clean, nothing to worry about, nothing post to do later. But again, the problem with that is that your camera will be locked out for 30 minutes. Because again, when the camera is doing that long exposure noise reduction, you can't look through the viewfinder, you can't take another picture, you shouldn't turn the camera off, So sometimes what I'll do is if I do want to say, you know what, I want to take one long exposure, that might be the last shot of the night. I'll make sure that I've got at least 3/4 of a battery, hopefully maybe put in a fresh battery, and then I'll take that 30-minute hour shot. And then as I pack up, I just make sure not to turn off my camera, put it in my bag, and on the drive home, it's doing a long exposure noise reduction. I'm all about staying productive in the field, right? So that if I had only one camera and one tripod, I would always stack, except if it was the last shot of the night. And then I come home running in long exposure noise. Now, when you get that home for stacking, people, you're going to use probably one of these two software solutions. This is Photoshop, does an awesome job for stacking stars. StarStax is a Mac only software, I believe, that kind of has some nice creative features. I'll touch upon that a little later. But one of the main things, you can turn your star trails to comets. You can create sort of videos, evolving star trails with it. Kind of a fun thing. And then on the PC side, there's a few other free software programs, but most of us, I would hope, have Lightroom and Photoshop, the photography software. So if you have those, then you've got it all. And Photoshop does a darn good job of it. And I'll show you a quick little video on how I do it. So here's my series of images. And when I, kind of like when we do a pano, I want to mark these, and whether in the field, whether I mark the beginning of a star trail with my hand up or down, I could do that. I just use the metadata, look at the time, and then when I get them in Lightroom, I assign them a color. So my star trails are often the number 6 red. So I've color coded. I found the series of star trails. So here I'm going to show you how I take them from Lightroom into Photoshop. Okay, so here they're all color coded. So then I click on the first one and then click on the last one. These are 2-minute shots, F4. So I click on all of them. There we go. Then I go up to edit file, edit in, and then I'll keep going, open as layers in Photoshop. Okay. Now, again, depending upon how big that your file sizes are, this could take a cup of coffee, or it could take just a few minutes. But they all will load in, look like this. Then you select all the layers and you go up to the blend mode, which is often defaulted to normal, and go to lighten. Voila. That connects all the bright elements in the scene, and I'll zoom into 100% to make sure there's no breaking in the stars, and those stars look good. Good job, Gabe. Right on. Go back to fill screen. And then you can save this back into Photoshop. Now, you'll see there's some editing that can be done as well, further editing here. If you have offensive lights, people walking through, cars trailing when they should have, et cetera, et cetera. You might want to create masks, remove those. You can also flatten these. It's often, this is a pretty big file if I were to save it just like that. Another step to do would be to go to layer, flatten your layer, so it's now all one file. And that's going to make it a little bit more manageable file on your computer and back in the other software from there. But then you can bring it back into Lightroom to edit from there, or edit in Photoshop, whatever your key thing. But it's easy, right? It's an easy thing to do. Any questions before I jump into our next topic? Okay. All right. I see a lot of note taking, so that's good. All right, so another, so speaking of sort of, I just mentioned, there can be sometimes some offensive things in the sky that we want to remove. Clouds, planes, and more, we're noticing satellites up in the skies that are really becoming interfering with our star trails, kind of with that. So um here's an image of clouds with star trails. And for this image, and clouds in general, it really depends how fast those clouds are moving. And on a windy night, I would say that you want to limit your shutter speeds to about 2 to 4 minutes. If you go, especially if it's really overcast, like I liked the movement of the clouds, especially the beginning. But if that bigger area of clouds right in here was above here and it was more just overcast, I might even go to 15 seconds or lower. You know, we want, with clouds, we want to avoid just creating a blank, boring white sky, right? We want to still capture some of the texture and then capture the movement. You know, we were out just, on a workshop, and got all set up for star trails. And so we all had like these 2-minute, whatever we're about to commit to an hour and a half star trail. And all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, a bunch of clouds move in, and it was going to be endless clouds. So I said, guys, let's go back. Let's stop that star trail. And now instead of packing up, now what can we do? Now let's actually talk about cloud trails and do shorter exposures, emphasize the clouds. So don't let the weather make you pack it up, right? There's always creative solutions to the challenges that we encounter at night. And if you always remember, hey, I'm not out here to create star trails. I'm not out here to capture the Milky Way. I'm out here to play with time, right? So what's moving and how can I amplify that? Here's another creative. This is up in Maine during the summertime. So we can see some star trails peeking behind the clouds. But this is about, I think, a minute and a half long shutter speed. This is a little bit of sort of let's call them gently moving clouds to the south. This is one of my favorite shots, Dry Tortugas National Park. And I got an opportunity. The first time I took this shot, too many clouds came in, and I had the opportunity to shoot this for 4 hours and create this epically long circumpolar star trail. But really, because the clouds came in for the original shot, I had to reduce that exposure to, even though I captured 4 hours, I only had about 2 hours of usable stuff. This night it was a bit more fortunate with the clouds, even though there are some along the horizon eating away at the clouds, because obviously if they cover the stars, then your camera won't see it, and so you'll get a little bit of that star braille in the image. But this one turned out pretty cool. 191 minute and a half shots that equal almost a 5-hour exposure, 4 hours and 45 minutes at ISO 1000 at f4. But let me show you the original image. That's the original image, right? And this was during a workshop. So this is the one pathway. I'm not going to stand there and tell people they can't walk through because I'm exposing for 5 hours, right? That's not fair to everyone. I don't own the park. I don't own this road. And yes, it's nice when people don't walk in front of it, but there is ways you can remove it. But I had people, you could see the people up at the top, you could see the reflections of the water, people walking by with a flashlight, safety first. I had some person do a little globe out there on the pathway, but in Photoshop, I went to each layer that had any sort of additional light in the scene, and I removed it. And it didn't take me another 4 hours and 45 minutes, but it took me probably a solid hour with it. So communication is key, obviously, but there's sometimes when you can't control the scene, and just know that you can control it in post. And again, removed all that and got really what I was dreaming for. And then create a variety of star trails. I think most of us love those circumpolar images, right? There's one right here. This is with light painting. This is at f4. And this is almost 2 hours. This is 1 hour and 45 minutes at ISO 6400. So this is a dark night, right? This is a dark night that we're just using LED lights to light paint the twins here in Capitol Reef. Found the North Star with photo pills and made sure it was sort of right in the middle, aligned that way, and then went for that long shot here. Everyone, I think, searches this one out, but if your portfolio of images of star trails is just this image, it's going to be a little boring after a while. So again, find a variety. This one back to Bannerman Island. This is a 12-minute single shot, ISO 100 at f4. And to me, this is a perfect complement. Again, this is about the castle and about the support pieces that are holding up the castle. And then the stars are a nice complement to that. Sometimes the stars are going to be more dominant, right? And it's complementing the scene. But hopefully there's the synergy, there's the energy and complementing going between the two, and one is not overtaking the other. Here is a shorter exposure, 6.5 minutes, okay, at ISO 800. I'm facing this way. I'm facing the northeast here by looking at the star trails. Similar, the north is kind of to the left. So in this one, I'm facing almost east. It's the celestial equator is just out, or no, it's right there above that last pillar, right over here. And again, photograph under different moon phases. Full moon, I find to be the one where, again, we can get to our optimum exposures. This is down in Florida. And this is on a very nice long star trail. This is probably about 45 minutes, an hour. This is back to natural bridges. This one's a little too chaotic, right? This one because there's no moon. I'm shooting up into the Milky Way. That's why that area is even brighter. That's the gases of the Milky Way up there. And this is, I think, about a 45-minute star trail, but I'm all the way wide open at 2.8. I'm all the way high. It's ISO at 6400. So it's almost like there's no break. I don't see any of that. The sky, it's all kind of almost all white and stars. So it's a little overtaking, I think, for that image. And then look, as always, look for unique compositions. Look for inside out. Look for windows in the landscape or out in the scene. This is no way I could have kind of determined this prior, but I made my best guess, and I saw that there was one of the bright stars right kind of in the middle of that of the tube of the ladder there, and I stopped the star stack at, I think, probably 50 minutes. I nailed it, for this shot. Now again, but let's say I did it for 30 minutes and I said, you know what, I want to keep that star contained in that hole there. I could have not used all of the star trails, or I could have erased them as well. But this one, I nailed it. But it's always better to overshoot and underuse if need be for your star trails. It just obviously gives you options. And inside Dry Tortugas, looking out, getting reflections of star trails in the water. We have very still water inside the moat area. And this is one where I kept the person with the red light walking along that path, because that just highlighted the path even more. So again, you don't always have to remove everything, keep things in if it helps your viewers wander amongst the image. Back to Lake McDonald and Glacier National Park. Again, if you can find reflections, that's always sort of a bucket list thing to do with star trails. But bottom line, emphasize movement. Look for movement in the clouds, look for movement in the water, cars, etc. Or even perhaps do a night portrait amongst the star trails. So this was our workshop crew at Sloss Furnaces in Birmingham, Alabama, So we basically took this photograph of everyone. We popped some flashes to freeze them. And then we only needed them for about 5 minutes and then let the camera continue to rip the night sky for another 45 minutes, an hour. So we just used the sky portion for all 45 minutes, but then just used the portrait portion for the bottom part. Fairly easy to do in Photoshop. If you're comfortable with blending and layers and stuff like that, a fairly easy thing to do. And then look at the brighter elements in the sky. So planets. Here we have one of the planets, or I think two of the planets right there side by side. It's probably Venus and Jupiter, and those are much brighter. So sometimes that can be actually too much. Can take away, because now we're just looking to that. We're always drawn to the brighter parts of the scene. So now I'm looking at that part of the scene. So unless they're in the right place, sometimes I avoid them, or just know that I'm going to have to deal with that later. Moon trail, right? We can always do a moon trail. This is a 5+ hour star trail f4 at ISO 200. And then the cool thing about this is you can also create, when you're, like I said, when you're doing star trails, you're collecting a lot of single images. You can also turn and create a time lapse out of them as well. So here we have 76 4.5-minute exposures that can create a quick time lapse as well as a quick star/moon trail. Blue R blends, that's becoming really popular at night photography, and then adding the element of star trails is kind of not what everyone is doing. Oftentimes people are doing the Blue R blend with Milky Way and stuff like that. This is from Shenandoah, and this is a focus stacked foreground during the Blue R blend of the compass. Then I focused at infinity, or on the stars, and then I took and an hour and a half later, once we got through the twilights and it was become dark enough, I took 27 4-minute shots at f4 ISO 400 for what ends up being a 1 hour and 48-minute stacked star trail shot. So I'll kind of break this down. Here's my I did a focus stacking because it was really close to this image, right? So this is, we're doing star stacking and focus stacking, right? Two separate things. Did my focus stacking first so that I had everything in the foreground leading all the way up to the rolling hills of Shenandoah. Basically, I wanted to make sure that the hills and the compass were in focus. So these is built into Nikon's cameras. But you can also obviously do it manually too. Sometimes I do it manually as well, but just make sure everything is in focus all the way through. Took that during that twilight, and then waited for it to get dark. And then here's my series of night images right there that I collected in Lightroom, right? And so there's the combination. This is one of those images. I put them together for star trails, and then I brought in the foreground and did some blending. This is definitely some heavy lifting, I will say. But this is sort of what you can do, what you can aspire to, and this is kind of next level star trails when we add focus stacking, star trails, blending, and all that kind of stuff. Urban star trails. Now I live in New York City. Only stars I see are walking around the streets. I can barely see two planets because of the amount of light pollution. So I really take advantage of going out to darker areas. But go to Boston, go to San Francisco. This is right outside of LA. If you put yourself into a dark area and you are looking back into a bright area, then that light pollution is really only affecting the horizon, maybe 10, 20 degrees up into the sky. Here I am in the San Gabriel Mountains looking out onto the Los Angeles sprawl. And I was out of camp, and I my camera, left it out all night. And this is about a 4 or 5 hour star trail stack as well. You can also, again, like I said, turn these into comets. That's with the Star Stacks software. And that can create a sort of, it's brighter and bigger and then goes to that kind of feel. So if you want to create the sort of put some dinosaurs at the bottom, create that end of the world star trail, you can do that. This is one of my favorite urban shots. This is my partner at National Parks at Night, Tim Cooper, took this in San Francisco. So showing San Francisco's, that's a bright big city, but here we are over in the Marina Headlands. It's dark over here. He's getting star trails. He's getting airplane trails, car trails, a little bit of boat trails, all of it. And actually, this is one of the few images where I think the chaos is actually working. You know, I talked to him about it. I said, you know, usually I would have just defaulted and spent an hour removing all those, especially airplane trails, but it actually kind of works with it. And it's kind of like this chaos, and that's then just, you know, equaling the star trails in the end. And again, maybe they only take away one or two of the airplane trails. You can remove one, you can remove all. It's all kind of that dealer's creative choice. How many stars will your camera record? Okay, so this is just driving home that point that those faster apertures will record more stars. Is it too chaotic? I generally recommend 1 to 2 stops down from your maximum exposure or your maximum aperture, but that's with some moonlight, right? If we're wanting to do star trails on a moonless night and there's not much any more light, you're going to be kind of maxed out, and you might be able to shoot at f4 3200. That's sort of as optimal as you can kind of get. But this is Grand Canyon, South Rim, 3-hour star stack at 5.6 and ISO 1600. So, and I think this is a really nice star trail that the bright stars are being seen. There's enough, you know, contrast in the sky where it's not too chaotic, and it's complementing both the Grand Canyon and the night sky. It's a nice combination of complementing each other. You know, looking back at this shot, again, this one, this is when we go to ISOs lower to 200 to 400, will really be rich with color. But again, fewer stars are going to be recorded. Those dimmer stars are not going to be seen. ISO 800 to 1600 is going to be probably the best balance of the color of the stars, and also balancing that brightness for darker nights out there. So here we have a 3-hour star trail at 5.6 and ISO 800. All right, so lower ISO, again, to summarize, lower ISOs record the color of the stars more faithfully. Try to stay under 1600 ISO, or your stars could become overexposed and just too white. I wanted to share a challenging image, and this is an image, I sort of a dream come true image from my childhood that I was able to do earlier last year. I went to Photopills camp, and I did a layover down in the southern Spain to visit a place that I had seen in a childhood book, one of my favorite books, Ferdinand the Bull. And then I became a sort of, about 10 years ago, I noticed the town of Ronda, and it's a town that's only connected by these ancient bridges built in pre-Roman times. And I was like, oh man, that would be a great place to do some night photography. But it's in every shot, there's no star trail shot of this image, at least on Instagram and Google. And I could see why, because really this is a sunset twilight kind of shot, because as you can see, they use a lot of those floodlights, those sodium vapor floodlights that kind of light up the bridge, light up the scene. And then there's that waterfall, right? That lights up the light. A little bit of that light comes onto the waterfall, but that quickly becomes dim. So this is a heavy contrast scene that when I take a proper exposure for the night and balancing the ambient exposure in the room, I think I could see one star right here. I think I said there's another one over here. There's like 4 stars here. And I'm like, this could be a skunk, Gabe, you know, but what I did was I raised up my ISO and went to that. Well, I balanced exposure and went to a very, very short star trail shot of 3 seconds, right? And went to an ISO of 800 at f8. So I raised up that ISO so I could hopefully get some of those dimmer ones. Found a balance there. I'm facing east here. This was, again, a complicated image to put together because I had my twilight blend so I can get the waterfall, the balance of the bridge, and then I'm recording enough of the night sky there that I'm not blowing out the bridge. I don't, enough that it's light polluting the sky, so that those stars aren't being recorded. But very, very excited to get this, very happy with it. And this is the only star trail shot of this location out there, at least, maybe, now the cat's out of the bag, I guess. So we'll see some more later. So I also wanted to share with you, that's it for the presentation, but I did want to share with you one other thing here, and this is a Star Trail video. Okay, so this is another fun thing you can do. And this is, again, I just said I got back from Rapa Nui or Easter Island, and this is the place of the Big 15 Moai. It's called Tongariki, and I'm facing the Southern Cross here, and the southern skies, and so I wanted to create this star trail. So here is, when we're collecting these images, we can also kind of create that sort of effect of them kind of coming together. So I lead off with the final shot, but then show you the 42-minute images, 47 2-minute images I did to create that. Let me show you quickly, without getting into too much depth. Or did you guys see that? Was I sharing the right screen, or was I missing that? I think I missed that.
There's no.
Yeah. Yeah, hold on. Duh. Let me share my screen, and let me share the full desktop so we won't have that issue again. So here we are, Tongariki, the Big 15. And we also see all the people coming for sunrise, all those cars coming in. We had the whole place to ourselves. Then all of a sudden, 150 people showed up for sunrise. So this is another cool effect with star trails that we can create. And these are kind of fun. And then we can post this video of the star trail on this one. You do it, you'll need star stacks here. Okay, and this is what star stacks looks like. You basically load in your TIFFs files. So you work on your files as need be, and then you put in your TIFFs. So you can see I just loaded all my TIFFs right in here. I go to my blending mode and I choose lighten, same as Photoshop. It's a lighten mode. Okay, they also have a nice gap filling mode. So if perchance you maybe had more of a gap in between your stars and you want to get that filled, you can go to their gap filling mode. It does work okay. Then I went to comet mode to emphasize that, and I went to the long star trails. I like that part of it right there. This is the most important thing, is to go to cumulative image saving and check save after each step. Okay, so basically what's doing is it's connecting the dots of these two, then adding the third, then adding the fourth, but each one of them is being saved as a separate file. So now we can take all those files and bring those files into any video, software editing of choice. Let's see, nothing really else to kind of go over here. This is just the naming. I save it as a JPEG because you don't need to be bringing in TIFFs to create a video that's going to be big enough. Start with number 1 and then put it in a folder. So I do it in Photoshop. I have Photoshop. I don't want to learn Premiere. So what I do then is I then bring it over to Photoshop. And the key thing here is you need to go to Window and make sure that your timeline is on. Timeline, I just took it away. We go to Window, and timeline. And now when we import these files, which there's a specific way to import them, we go to File Open, which is common, and we choose our files. We go ahead and just select the first one. Actually, you don't need to choose all of them. You select the first one. Very important to make sure that they're named. And this is something part of the naming process you can do in star stacks, is that they're consecutive numbers, right? If there's a break in the numbers, it won't work, right? So this is numbers 1 through 56. And then you click on image sequence, and then you hit open. And that will bring all these files into Photoshop as layers over here. And then you can edit, and it'll ask you what frame rate you want to do these, make this video in. And then you can test it by pressing your space bar. This is, again, another version, slightly edited of it. And I believe this is 10 frames per second. You could, if you shoot shorter and longer, because this was about an hour and a half, 2 hours of shooting, but I was doing 2 minutes. So if you want to do this, I would go to shorter Star Trek so you can have more of that effect, because this really only turned out to be anywhere from a 4-second. If I did 24 frames per second, it would have been a 4-second video. I went down to 10 frames per second, so I have a 10-second video for this. But this is a fun way. I was inspired by one of our speakers at Night Photo Summit to kind of explore this a little bit more. Katrina Brown, she's on Instagram, and she's a super creative night photographer known as Red-Headed Katrina. So I wanted to show you that. This hasn't been debuted yet to the public. It might be out on our Instagram tomorrow. We'll see, but you guys got to see it first and to see a new fun way to edit star trails. So I know I gave you a lot of information. A lot of this is in my book. I didn't pick my book because my book is only available as an ebook right now, but if you're interested, you can look up, I'll put it in the chat. It is usually just available. Boom, there it is, called Night Photography. From two fat finger there, from snapshots to great shots. So you can look up that. I go over all this and many of the other things we went for there. As well as, again, like I said, continue to follow us. We have a weekly blog at National Parks at Night. Our Instagram accounts are always, we share all of our shooting information and locations and everything like that. Join us on a workshop. I mean, nothing is better than obviously spending, often our workshops are 5 to 9 days. We have a few 3-day workshops, but most of them are like 5 to 9 days. So that's a day when you can, consecutive nights, live, breathe, night, all things night photography, because that's also part of our education. I just talked about star trails tonight, but we really love talking. And I think the talk I did with Chapel Hill was about the variety of things you can create at night. And that's all we love that. We love, going and seizing the night. We go there with ideas, but obviously the weather, as we all know, can skunk us out of certain situations. So being able to kind of bend with the conditions and capture something, because we're just playing with time. So David, I'll take any questions if anyone's got.
Yeah, we had a couple of chats.
Okay.
Becky Hawkins was asking if it's a very light night, like at the Arctic Circle, can you still capture star trails?
Right. So if there's not much night, right? If we're just in the twilight, right? Then you're where are you getting your footing in the Arctic Circle? Oh, well, right. I'm going to go up to Norway in June or July of this year. It's not going to be night at all. So I'm there. I'm going to go up there to capture the midnight sun and the sort of that what they call the simmer dim, that forever twilight light. But again, if you can't see the stars because you're up in Alaska, northern Canada, or up in northern Scandinavia, then no star trails can happen, right? So know when you really need to be in astronomical twilight. or true night for us to get, even from astronomical twilight to true night, you're still going to lose about a stop of light. I always try to, I might get some blue hour foreground, that kind of stuff, but I usually don't start my star trails until I get a consistent exposure throughout the night. And that's going to happen about halfway through astronomical twilight or right into night.
Right. Barney has a question, but I'm going to have to ask him to repeat it.
So Gabe, the question was about the Easter Island shot that you did, the video that you showed.
Yep.
There seemed to be some anomalies in the north, south, east, west. And I was wondering if those are processing anomalies or just what they were.
That's just in the video file, that video file at the end. It kind of has that moire pattern kind of showing up. But if you, let's see, this is, if I'm not looking at it in an MP4 way, then it'll look fine. Like, here we go. Let me show you this. So, right, when we do it in that video, it can be kind of crushing that information. But if you can kind of see, and then let's remember, Barney, I'm facing south, remember, because the north and south are flipped. Right. So if you face north and the southern hemisphere, it's going to be those round humps. But then if you face to the south, and it's kind of tricky to find the south because they don't have that southern pole there, or a Polaris, so to speak, to guide us. So here you can see this is there's the version. You see it? Am I sharing the right screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So you can see anything you see right here where it's kind of a little brighter, that's the Milky Way. So that's sort of that cloudy area of the Milky Way kind of moving through. And that's usually where those sort of moire patterns can happen when it's being crushed in those video files.
All right, we got a couple of other questions. Let's see.
Sure.
Well, okay. Kathy Smith wanted to know, what is your Instagram address?
So my personal one is Ruinism. I'll type that in. Gabe's IG. This is Ruinism, which is really more, I do a lot of stories there, but you will see some Easter Island posting. I also run our National Parks at Night Instagram. So you can always reach out to me there. It's unless I'm on a workshop somewhere and someone else, you can follow us there. And that's where we kind of we post in 4 or 5 days of the week and a variety of our stuff that's up there. But we'll be heavy Easter Island this next week or two.
All right, then we got another question. Let me see. It says, Pareshti asked, is it possible to use 2-second exposure delay setting instead of shutter release remote control?
Yes, doing the 2-second in between, and then and maybe going to continuous shooting and having the trigger on to do that. You can, it's not optimal, it depends, if you're facing towards the north, you might not, because those stars are moving, are rotating less. You won't notice probably any breaking in the skies, but if you're shooting to the east, west, south, it's really a little bit better to, again, those intervalometers are $50. It's better to get probably more optimal, let's say, to do it that way.
One other question.
Yeah.
Is there a time of the year that star trail photography is better than other time?
Nope. Not unless, again, you're the only time I'd say is obviously winter, you can get started earlier, right? And be done earlier. And summer, you might need to be waiting until later at night, and you'll be staying out later at night. And again, if you go to those northern regions where it doesn't, northern or super southern regions where the sun doesn't set much at all, that's it. Obviously, winter time is going to be maybe a little bit more optimal too, because we can get those longer. You'll have more options because, like I said, the summer and the heat can make you're going to be forced into shorter Star Trail stacks. The winter is generally colder, depending upon where you are, and you could do longer Star Trail stacks. But I shoot Star Trails year round.
Does the cold weather affect the camera battery life that much?
So right there's the balance, right? We want a little bit of that cold weather to make sure our processor isn't heating up, but then the cold weather can affect the battery life of your camera. So if you have a new battery, that's nice, but that's where then maybe if, hey, it's cold out, I want to do over an hour exposure, then I might want to use the USB battery pack, maybe put a warmer around the battery pack area, or just go with a battery grip or something like that if you want to get those super long exposures at night in the wintertime in the cold. Yes.
All right.
Okay,
We got another
I
question.
thought it might. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, okay, I've got a question and maybe due to my ignorance, but what is the difference between an image capture between a series of images that will make a single still photograph and the series that will produce a movie, a video?
Yeah, there's no difference in that. That's why I say you can be shooting one way and have 3 different outputs, 3 different solutions for it. But what I will say, if you definitely want to make a time lapse or this Star Trail movie part of it, then you want to take shorter shots, right? Because that was 46 2-minute shots. And again, if we go to sort of our optimal movie or time lapse mode, that is often going to be 24 frames per second, right? So if I'm using 24 and divide that into, how many, each image I'm using, then I ended up at 24, like as a 4-second video. And that's not enough. I think you want to shoot for getting a video that will in the end give you 10 to 15 seconds of video. And that's going to mean collecting about 200 to 250 shots out in the field. So then you want to look at maybe taking 30-second Star Trail shots out in the field, because then you'll get that done. So you get 120 done per so you get you get 120 30 seconds, you get 120 per hour. So in 2 hours you'll have a good sized time lapse / star movie.
So if your aim is a still photograph, then you take longer exposures but fewer of them. Is that right?
You could do the same with that as well. You can stack 30-second shots. Again, if you want the optimal to do everything, I would say just go to those 30-second stacks. But if you're not interested in making the time lapse or making the movie, then you can play to the optimal conditions of the light, the temperature, and your camera equipment, and then maybe go to 2 minutes or 4 minutes or something like that.
One other question.
Yep.
I'm not sure what camera you use, but have you used various cameras for Star Trail, and which one do you have? Do you think it does a better job?
So I'm a Nikon shooter, but I again, working at B&H, I get to try all the toys out, and they all perform. We're living a digital golden age. So if you have a camera from the last 3 to 5 years, Sony, Canon, Nikon, like I said, Olympus and Panasonic are kind of the sleepers out in the market. Olympus and Olympus for all their models, but Panasonic, for some of their models, has something that's called live composite. And that is a mode that you can actually see the star trails building up in the image, and it will also control any other highlights that won't become overexposed. So it's a great way to do light painting, a great way to control if someone, you know, walks in the scene and stuff like that. It's doing it, and it does a pretty darn good job. Now, the problem, you know, the other side, the caveat of that camera is that because it's such a small sensor, and this I'm just talking about the Olympus end of things, is that the highest ISO it can get to, I feel, is 3200 ISO. You could probably push it to 6400, but you're going to need some other software to clean it up out there. But I've known Nat Geo photographers using that camera and getting really good stuff with it. So it's, the tools out there are all great. You know, it's how you implement them, right? You know, they're all good hammers. So once you practice and you get familiar with it, you'll be able to succeed. But more importantly is getting that sturdy tripod, right? That sturdy tripod is going to be, I think, unless you're you know, because at night photographer, that tripod is so key. That's the horse we ride on out into the field, right?
Great. So one other question was, do you take any email questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'll drop in my email right here. Gabe@nationalparksatnight.com. Yeah, definitely feel free to reach out to me with any other questions. If it's more gear centric, I might throw you over to the B&H email, just because I could work on it during work hours. But I'm always happy to chat night stuff, and yeah, so feel free to reach out. We can continue the conversation.
That's great. Yeah. Is there any last questions? Because we're past the library closing time here.
Oh,
Is he still at B&H?
Oh, somebody asked if you're still at B&H.
yeah, I'm still there. I'm still there. They put up with me.
Right. All right. Any last questions before we close up for the night? I think that's it.
All
Great
right,
job.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. Really appreciate. I know you guys coming out tonight, dedicated, whether you come out to the library or from your home, dedicating the time to learn more about night photography. And I hope to see you out there seizing the night soon.
All right.
Thank you so much.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a great evening,
All
everyone.
right. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.
Great guy.